Kang Mayan and her best friend, Choi Jun-sang, were standing in front of their cold CEO Jun Jungkook, looking at each other in confusion as they both didn't know why Mr. Jeon called them during the work. He sounded like an irritated father who had give his kids homework on a Friday afternoon but somehow managed to be polite even though he was angry. Choi Jun-sang looked at like he agreed with the sentiment but didn't want to say anything since Mr. Jeon didn't like to being interrupted while talking. Jungkook turned around and looked at her coldly. The atmosphere became tense as Mr. Jin Jungkook started to speak again, this time not so politely. The CEO started to turn towards his office without saying anything else. She wanted to argue with him, but she knew he wouldn't listen to her because of his ego. He didn't appreciate her and her best friend talking up space in his business. Choi Johnson smiled softly and patted her shoulder comfortingly. She sighed and nodded her head. Jin Jungkook joined the company after his grandfather wanted to rest. He was the one who created this company. Everyone respected him as he was a joyful person, unlike Jin Jungkook, who has a short temper and often angry about little things. Jungkook hated people talking behind his back. No matter how high or low their position, it was against his nature. If someone talked badly behind his back, he wanted them to pay the price. His grandfather loved him so much and always supported him in his every decision. Jin Jungkook wasn't a bad man, just an egoistical one, and it was all because of his family. Little did he know he liked Ryan because of her personality and hard work. He admired her. She was stubborn and never admitted her mistake. She was good at her job, smart and funny. Jungkook could see from the way she handled herself and was polite with others that she was also kind-hearted. Even though everyone said no to her in the beginning, she eventually got along with everyone. She was very open-minded and honest. Jungkook liked her a lot, but one though he couldn't tolerate her best friend Choi Jun-sang. He found it annoying that Choi Jun-sang would constantly flirt with her every day at work. He didn't understand why he had to do that. He didn't want to interfere with her life, but he couldn't help. Jungkook threw his coat on his chair. He rubbed his face with his hand and sighed. He thought angrily, still rubbing his face. Sudden knock on the door startled him. Jungkook opened his eyes quickly and straightened himself. He put his hands down and cleared his throat. The door slowly cracked open, revealing the woman. His voice sounded cold. She nodded her head before leaving the office. Ryan looked at Miss Lee, who was confused by Jungkook's command. Ryan asked, making her shake her head. Miss Lee seemed curious as to why he was angry. Ryan sighed and rolled her eyes. She shook her head. Once Miss Lee left her alone, she glanced at Jungkook's office and smiled. She whispered before headed to her desk, grabbed her notebook and pen and started working. He said while looking at his phone, waiting for her answer. Ryan hummed in response and continued writing something. Junsen decided to wait for her, but it wasn't long when Jungkook came and looked at him. He spoke coldly. Junsen and Ryan frowned slightly. He cleared his throat. Jungkook looked away awkwardly. Ryan nodded her head and looked at Junsen, who smiled and headed to have lunch, leaving them alone. Without giving Ryan another look, he left the office. Ryan raised her eyebrows in surprise and followed him out. The moment Ryan entered the conference room, Jungkook was already sitting there. She sat down next to him silently and looked at the lunch. She asked politely, totally confused about his behavior. Her heart was pounding so loud, but she managed herself very calmly as she didn't want him to know about her nervousness. She felt like if her heart was beating faster, he might hear it. She was about to say something but stopped when Jungkook looked at her coldly. She bit her tongue and nodded her head. Jungkook took out his food and placed it in on his plate. His eyes moved between food and Ryan's expressionless face. He suddenly asked. Ryan snapped out of her daze and looked at him. Jungkook didn't say anything more as he began to eat. He asked as he took some rice in his mouth. Ryan choked a bite and coughed loudly. Her cheeks turning red due to embarrassment, she looked at him and noticed that he was smiling. That smile was enough to melt her heart. Her voice came out muffled due to the fact that she tried to avoid his gaze. As he started to eat, Ryan started to eat too. He couldn't believe what was happening and he was starting to wonder if they were dating or not. She lied to him. He smirked and teased her. She replied while frowning. He leaned forward a bit as his smirk widened. She denied shyly. Jungsen laughed in amusement. Vian shrugged and turned away, trying to hide her blush. Vian finally looked at him and sighed. She insisted while shaking her head. Jungsen chuckled lightly and grabbed her hand. He held her hand and pulled her closer when he saw Jungkook coming there. He smirked and leaned a little closer, not too much, just tried to make Jungkook jealous, and it worked. He yelled at him, grabbing his arm and pulling him away for Vian. Junsen smiled widely, trying to control his laughter. He said, glaring at Junseng, who was looking at him innocently. He pulled Vian's wrist and led her to his office. He closed the door and walked up to her. His tone was harsh. Vian's body shivered a bit as she shallowed nervously. She tried to convince him, but he was having none of it. He glared at her. She was shocked at what she heard from him. His voice became serious and stern. He was looking at her seriously. She lowered her head and bit her lip nervously. He sighed and grabbed her chin, bringing her face up. He stared into her eyes for a while. His eyes went closed. He wanted to enjoy this moment as well as her soft lips. However, she didn't move back, and his forehead rested on hers. His eyes fluttered and opened again. He could hear her heartbeat and saw how nervous she looked. He said softly before leaning back slightly. Her voice trembled. He smiled and cupped her face with his hands. He gazed deeply at her beautiful eyes. Then he pulled her towards his chest, kissing her forehead. She blinked several of times, feeling shocked by what just had happened. This was first time someone told her he loved her. She was speechless, but she still hugged him tightly. He hugged her back, and they stared like that for a while until she broke the silence. She looked up at him and smiling. He smiled back and hugged her tightly once more. He kissed her temple, causing her cheeks to turn red. He added before pecking her lips softly.